Welcome to the talk show Life Stories with Marc Hoberman. The goal of this show is to provide a learning experience to people of all ages, with guests from various fields in academics, a wide range of industries, and insight into the many forms of art, athletics, and entertainment. We hope you enjoy the show. Rock and roll legends The Zombies will be our guests today. Argent and Colin Blunstone will talk about their 5 decades of making music. The Rock and Roll Hall of Famers will also be speaking about their new documentary.
Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees Argent and Colin Blunstone of The Zombies. Welcome to Life Stories with Marc Hoberman.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, nice to see you, Mark.
Nice to see you. Before we get started, I just got to say that this morning I looked at, I have pictures in my bedroom like everybody else, and I have a wedding picture. And my wife looked kind of happy in it, but I'm wondering why she looks happier in this picture.
I wonder why.
Yeah. Just Colin, you and I are gonna have a talk a little later, Colin. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
So listen, let's get started. You guys have been together for almost 60 years. I was at your concert last year at Penn's Peak in Pennsylvania. Colin, you celebrated your 77th birthday that night. Rod, you were celebrating a rather lengthy wedding anniversary. In a world where more than 50% of marriages end in divorce, what has kept your musical marriage alive for so long? So, Rod, you seem to be the marriage expert. You go first.
Well, it's the thing is, it's a piece of luck because Colin and I always got on from the first time we met, and we've remained friends through our life, although there were periods where we didn't see much of each other. And, it's still such a pleasure to be friends with Col now. It really is. So, that really helps, because the thing is, when you're on the road with all the stresses and the different things that come up on the road, people often fall out with each other because you're thrown together in a very close way in many ways, both in a work sense and also in a social sense. And you have to have a pretty strong affinity for each other to sort of last those things and take them in your stride, so it's that's been a joy, really. But we've also always really enjoyed working together and found it easy and found that it worked for some strange reason. When Colin and I got back together again in an enduring musical sense, when Colin phoned me up and asked me if I'd do 6 gigs with him, which I didn't want to do. Not because I didn't want to play with Colin. I just didn't want to play live anymore. I was involved in so many other things. But immediately, honestly, it felt as if we'd been working together a few months before, not whatever it was, 30 years or something. And you can't build that in. It either happens or it doesn't. So that's something which really helps, I think.
I think also, we went through our formative years together. We met when we were 15, and Rob will often say he learned to write songs for my voice, and I learned to sing professionally to his songs. And this can only happen to you once in your life. And so there is a bond there because we started working together when we were so young. And of course, we've worked together for so many years. And I think that there is a kind of a security being on stage with the two of us. I know he's rock solid. Hopefully he feels I'm at least fairly rock solid. And it's just always a pleasure to work with Rod. And we're just so lucky and fortunate to have had this opportunity to work since 1999 in this version of The Zombies.
Yeah, that was 6 gigs, which have turned into 23 years.
Exactly.
If I'd phoned him up and said, do you want to spend the next 23 years on the road?
Who knew? Guys, I often say that my viewers often know the glory, but not the story. So both of you tell so many stories during your live performances. But Colin, what would you say was the band's greatest struggle throughout the years?
Well, I think the toughest time was definitely at the end of the first incarnation of the band. We worked professionally from 64 to 67, although the band actually started in 1961. And in particular, the non-writers, the writers, Rod and Chris White, had a deal with very honest publishers, so they were financially secure. But the non-writers, myself, Hugh Grundy was the drummer, and Paul Atkinson was the guitarist, were only getting fees from live work. And we weren't managed very well, and it was pretty desperate. You know, and I always say this is not about getting a third or a fourth car. I'm talking about having the money to eat. You know, and
it's breaking even. We never did more than break even.
No, that was a tough time, and unfortunately, of course, that was one of the main forces that led to the band finishing, because the three non-writers were very up against it, and Paul Atkinson at that time happened to get married, and so he had extra pressures on top of him. So I would say the most challenging time for us was around 66, 67, and it resulted in the band finishing.
Interesting, because that's a great philosophy to have, because the perseverance factor is a lesson to people even outside of the music realm. But, Rod alluded to this earlier. You both left the band and did some very successful solo work. Rod with Argent and Colin, of course, with Alan Parsons' project. So many groups break up and go solo, but they never return. So, Rod, what made you decide to return to the Zombies?
Well, the thing is that I'd worked with Colin on and off through the years anyway. I mean, immediately we broke up in that first incarnation. Chris White and Chris didn't want to play anymore, but he still wanted to be in partnership with me in some way or other. So we got a production deal with Clive Davis, and two projects. One was the formation of Argent. The second one was that Chris and I immediately wanted to make an album, we'd loved our production experience of producing Odyssey and Oracle ourselves, Chris and I, because we wanted the songs to end up sounding like we'd heard them in our heads, because that had not been happening. And we wanted to continue that process with Colin. And we took Colin into Abbey Road, and Chris had heard of this great string arranger who was a classical composer, but also did a lot of work for film and television, Chris Gunning. And we wanted him to be involved in some pretty avant-garde things. And we had this idea for the album, and we wanted half the album to be just Colin with a group of small string players, but done in a very classical way, and with nothing else. I mean, just half of the album, nothing else. So the very first track we did was Misty Roses, which was a song found by Colin, a beautiful song. And it started off with, in a very small way, with Colin singing intimately with a jazz guitarist. And then it went into the Chris Gunning classical string arrangement. And Chris and I both loved Bartok. And we said, we've got to make this really quite far out. We've got to take this into real avant-garde territory. And poor old Colin had to find out a way of singing against really atonal and dissonant music, but it sounded gorgeous. And strangely enough, I remember once, it's always people you wouldn't imagine, but the singer in Black Crows came along to see one of our sound checks, and he said, it's because my favorite record of all time was Misty Roses, with this Bartok string arrangement and everything. So it was we always had our eyes on doing something really experimental and musically that really made us feel we were pushing boundaries, and it was a terrific combination, and it resulted in a hugely successful period of recording in Europe with Colin. That album, there was a top 5 single. It was just great. On with Say You Don't Mind, the track that we used to finish with the Zombies in the old Denny Lane rock and roll version. But we re-recorded that, and it was a huge hit. So that was great.
It's quite funny, how in different territories, different songs are hits. And I know that in America, I've never had a hit single as a solo artist. But in the UK and in Europe, I've had lots of hits. And you have to be aware of your history in a way, because people will probably only want to talk to you about the records that were hits, and it can be a completely different conversation in one country. Then you get on a plane and you go to another country, and they want to talk about completely different music and a completely sort of a different history. They will see it in a different way, and it's always intrigued me that.
I was into jazz, and I really liked this guy Maynard Ferguson, famous jazz trumpeter. So I saw him almost as many times in concert as I saw you. And I eventually, when I was teaching, had him come to the school. We paid him to come to the school, and I had the kids who did our media coverage ask him the same question. He gave the same answer. I couldn't believe this guy who had to blow a trumpet was playing for 45 minutes before the concert. I'm like, dude, you're 75 years old. Are you crazy? And he really said that too, with the sleep and everything. And I have to say that after seeing you guys well over 24 times, maybe I'm wrong, but Rod, I thought the last 3 times I heard you, I think I heard you sing more the last 3 times than I did the first 22 times. So not to take, that's incredible. So am I right about that? Are you singing a little bit more now? Because I didn't notice that before.
Well, it's extraordinary because sometimes we're sort of almost forced, originally we were, to do an acoustic concert together where it's just 2 voices and piano. And it's very much more in evidence, my voice, in those situations because the whole band's not singing, basically. So that's I do sing a lot, but generally speaking, I'm not doing anything lead. Although on the new album, there's a song called Drop Reading and Stupid where we share vocals, and I loved recording that. It was great. But it's a question of the whole thing is what Colin was saying. It's keeping in shape, really, and that's what Maynard Ferguson was saying. Really, you've got to keep in shape, and the only way of doing that is to just keep doing it and work harder at it, and be sensible. But I don't think I'm singing any more than I used to. Maybe I'm doing more the one song on Odyssey and Oracle that features my voice. Maybe that was the case. I don't know.
Yes, could be. And Rod, not to take anything away from your incredible voice, but seriously, you're practically a gymnast. You're almost possessed when you're on the keyboards. So I brought my son's friend Levi was a piano player, and he's great, and he saw you play, and I think he almost wanted to quit. I mean, this was when you were, in your early 70s. And what do you do to maintain that level of musicianship consistently? The fingers are so fast, so nimble. You're not 1 second slower that I can hear from 20 or 30 years ago.
No, I think I'm probably a better player now than I was before. But I've always loved music and loved playing. And I've always thought, what a joy to be able to wake up each morning and actually do something that I would otherwise have paid to do and yet earn a really great living. I mean, that's such a favored situation. I mean, most people spend 2/3 of their lives doing what they don't want to do to be able to organize their life in a way that they want. And I haven't had to do that. And how privileged is that? I'm still just as motivated to be creative. I just want to be creative. I want to get to the end of my life and look back and say, well, I may not have made everything work, but I've given it my best shot. And I think I started out with some talent in music. I found music easy. I found it a natural milieu for me. And I remember when my parents gave me my first harmonica when I was 6 years old, I could somehow see the shape of the scale. I don't know what it is. But it was there, and I didn't have to really work hugely hard. I am self-taught, like many rock and roll musicians, but it's been something that's always been a joy to me, finding out new ways of playing. I've loved jazz always, and even when I was turned on to Infinity by Elvis, when I heard him in early rock and roll, I was listening to Miles Davis' wonderful early group with John Coltrane and Cannonball Adderley. Wow. And Milestones was the first thing that I could afford to buy. And that was, I didn't know at the time, but that was his first modal experiment on Milestones. And that informed, although again, I didn't know it, that informed She's Not There. When I wrote that, when I first met Pat Metheny, he said, all your modal work on She's Not There, that made it feel possible for me to do what I wanted to do. I thought, wow. And then I thought, there's no modal stuff on She's Not There. I was just trying to be the Beatles or something. Right. But I realized that from listening to so much Miles, and particularly, I can still sing you the solos on Milestones. That what I thought of was an ordinary chord change at the beginning that I'd written, A minor to D. I'd actually put a modal thing over it without knowing what I was doing, really, because it was, this is part of the self-teaching, I think, really. So I've always wanted to be creative, and and music and making music work has always been the most motivating thing for me. With this new album, it's just been great because we produced it absolutely. I could write the material in the COVID lockdown. It gave me time to do it. And when we recorded in the same way that we used to many, many years ago, getting everyone to record at the same time and getting a real feeling of capturing something real that was happening. And it's captured, you know, because in my mind, if you can get something creatively good and you can capture it, it's there forever. You know, that bit of magic that you may not get on the other 8 or 9 takes that you've done. Suddenly one take, well, and it must be the same with acting as well. When you get a performance where everyone's in sync and something happens that makes a real communication to the audience. And that's what always turns me on and motivates me more than everything else. And what you were talking about on performance, sometimes those magical nights, I mean, it might happen 1 in 15 or something, where you suddenly feel you can do anything. You suddenly feel that there are no limits at all. I mean, most of the other time you're really working hard and trying to remember and doing things, but there are occasional nights, and that's such a pleasure when that happens. You know, you're moving to a special space when that happens, and if you're creative at all, I think that's the loveliest time.
Well, you know, Rod, you have said about the upcoming album, Different Game. Making this album has been a joy from start to finish. So, Colin, what can you add about the making of your newest album?
Well, one thing I would say is that we were determined that we would record in what people think of as the old-fashioned way, that we would all be in the room together, playing the songs. It's almost like playing the songs live, but in a studio environment. We actually did it on our last album, and we found that we played differently when we all play together, when we're playing off of one another, and that includes me singing as well. So we were really determined to do that. Unfortunately, we started the album just before the pandemic, and it meant that we really had to just wait for 2 years before we could get everyone together, especially as our bass player is Danish. He lives in Copenhagen. It's very difficult to get him over to play with us, but that is certainly one thing that we've discovered about how we record, that it is better for us to record live. And we recorded the whole album in Rod's studio, which, on a lighter note, luckily is very close to where I live, so it means I can nip down there very easily. It was a joy. I mean, the guys in the band are all very, very good musicians, but they're very easy to work with as well. So it was an absolute pleasure. One other thing I'd think of is that Rod's written the majority of the songs on the album, and what we've always done is when he's finished a song, he'll call me and I go down and we work on the song, just the two of us, around the piano before the guys get involved. And I suppose in a loose way, we're just trying to see if it's gonna work with my voice and, you know, how we feel about the song. But usually by the time, if Rod's honed it to a certain level, he'll know that it's gonna work. But we do spend that time, a few hours, on the songs before the guys get involved.
And it's a pleasure to do that, actually. It really is. You know, it's a pleasure to work together, just the two of us, and make that happen.
Well, it certainly helps me. I hear a song in a different way. I mean, in the same way, it's kind of the same thing. When we said that if we all play together in the studio, we will all perform differently. But to learn a song just round the piano, you can hear the bare bones. And we can really talk about the phrasing. You know, we talk for hours about the phrasing of songs. And I find it a great advantage to go over the songs, first and foremost, with just Rod playing piano.
That's amazing. That sounds a lot to me like cooking a meal and getting the two secret ingredients together first, and then bring it in with the other food. So that's really incredible. And I'm going to wrap up soon, but I have to tell you that as a fan who's seen you almost 30 times,
Wow.
I don't know if you realize this, because when the lights go up, I think you can't really see. I don't know if you realize how many teens are in your audiences.
We do.
Okay, good, because I think when I used to go, like I said, I keep coming back to Maynard Ferguson. When I saw young trumpet players, they were like, what do I aspire to? So, Colin, what advice would you give to young musicians who want to succeed in this very competitive business? It's the music business, and lots of young people don't realize that.
Absolutely. It's what I would say is, just realize that you can have a lifetime's career in the music business. So when you're young, obviously you have to have talent. You have to practice. You know you're going to have to practice if you want to be good. But also just bear in mind that if you work hard, there is an option to have a lifetime's career. This doesn't. When we came into the business, a lot of people thought a band would stay together for 2 or 3 years, then it would finish, and you would go back and do something else for the rest of your life. But there's definitely a path now that you can spend your life in the music business. So try and learn a little bit about, particularly writing is incredibly important, but about recording. You can learn some bits about that, and about the business. You know, it's not always easy for musicians to concentrate on the business side, but it doesn't do any harm. Try and look at the whole spectrum of the music business and learn as you go along. And remember that if you work hard, there's a career path ahead for the rest of your life.
So before I sign off, I have to also give a shout out to my partners who joined us for those 25 plus concerts, Janine and Nick, because they love going with us. And I just have to say, Rod Argent, Colin Blunstone of the Zombies, thank you for joining us today and sharing your most successful musical journey that you're still on. To the viewers, don't forget to watch us on E360 TV, available on Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. EST, available on Roku and Apple Fire, Apple TV, and Amazon Fire. Remember to follow us on social media. Life Stories with Marc Hoberman is on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and of course our YouTube channel. Rod and Colin, it has been an honor. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, it's been a joy.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you for watching Life Stories with Marc Hoberman. To contact Marc, email him at info@lifestorieswithmarchoberman.com or visit him on social media through Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. Thank you for watching Life Stories with Marc Hoberman.